Tensions between the United States and Venezuela continue to rise over the deployment of American warships and fighter jets in the southern Caribbean. Last week, the U.S. launched airstrikes on several vessels in the region, killing over a dozen alleged drug traffickers. Venezuela's authoritarian socialist president, Nicolás Maduro, has denied his government is involved in drug trafficking and has called for the mobilization of civilians to defend the country from what he calls U.S. aggression.
Amid increasing tensions with the United States, Venezuela's military held a so-called encounter with the people on the streets of Caracas. Dozens of armored vehicles paraded through the capital, and civilians were given a chance to handle rifles and anti-aircraft guns. Following the U.S. strikes on alleged smuggling boats, Venezuelan officials have called for a show of resistance. There isn't a fisherman from any Caribbean island who goes out to fish and doesn't feel that a death sentence has been imposed without trial by the imperialists. They threaten, but we remain calm, with nerves of steel, calm and composed, with maximum popular mobilization and organization. Training sessions like these have become increasingly common since U.S. warships took up positions near Venezuelan waters a month ago. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro says President Trump is plotting to overthrow him and has called on a massive recruitment drive for the national militia. Many seem to be answering that call. For all Venezuelans, this training is very important because it helps us collaborate with our country, our president, with all who love our country and wish the best for everyone. Have you ever held a weapon? I haven't had the chance, but I think that at this point we have to start taking up arms to defend our country. There's plenty of defiant words and patriotic fervor on display in Caracas, but despite the push for mass mobilization, experts say Venezuela's military is still leagues behind its rival, the United States.
And for more, let's go to DW correspondent Oscar Schlenker. Oscar, is all of this only a show of strength from Maduro, or is it a meaningful escalation of Venezuela's defensive posture?
Well, we have to determine who the audience for this show of strength is. This is no threat to the military force that the U.S. poses against Venezuela. So this show of force is catered to a domestic audience and perhaps to allies across the region and beyond. What we have seen is that Maduro's regime is actually struggling to keep unity within his spaces. Their requests for civilians to enlist in the military have not really been answered with the masses they expected. And local media has published information that some high-ranking officials have started to abandon Venezuela. But the best evidence is what Reuters published yesterday. Nicolás Maduro sent a letter to Trump asking him to settle their differences through the U.S. envoy Richard Grenell, who had visited Caracas a few months ago and negotiated a deal to free American prisoners from there. So that's a different direction from what we're seeing from these videos.
Now, Venezuela's socialist President Maduro says the country is more united than ever. You hinted at that, but how much of that is political messaging and how much support does he really have in the country?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the political messaging. There is a lot of discontent and fear of Nicolás Maduro's regime. And that fear has been intensified since last year's presidential election that is widely believed to have been stolen. Just yesterday, the United Nations fact-finding mission published their report about Venezuela with key findings on systematic repression, grave human rights violations, crimes against humanity in Venezuela. And these findings show a notable impact on women, children, journalists, and human rights defenders, as well as severe restrictions on civic spaces and freedom of expression in Venezuela. So I would say, as a Venezuelan journalist myself, my own bias, that unity under these conditions is impossible or very hard to believe.
Now, why are tensions between Washington and Caracas flaring up so sharply right now?
Well, this has been building up for years, even before Trump came to power. The tensions between Venezuela and the U.S. has left a geopolitical void in the region that has been filled by Russia and China. And I believe the U.S. feels safer having friends in the region. But also, it has to do with the authoritarian regime against civilians in Venezuela. In the past year, we have seen a grave human rights violations, as I mentioned, and a mounting economic crisis that has impoverished millions. And that has resulted in mass migration, the biggest one in South America's history. And that has affected the entire region, including the US.
Now, how real do you think, briefly if you can, is the risk of a wider military confrontation?
Well, experts don't believe a wider military confrontation is going to affect the region at this moment. I don't think that there is any intention of it either. We have seen that in the past few years, the region is shifting politically, and that always results in conflict. But I don't believe there will be a intervention other than pressure we are seeing against key criminal activity like the drug trafficking.
DW correspondent Oscar Schlenker there for us. Thank you, Oscar.